All right. Hi there. My name is Kim Ernest, Dr. Kim Ernest, and I am a licensed psychologist and licensed professional counselor here in the state of Pennsylvania. And I am here today with the How to Be Happy Hour in our final installment of the Kids in Crisis series as we talk about the child and adolescent mental health crisis here in the state of Pennsylvania and beyond.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carl Sever, and I am a licensed professional counselor. I work at PCS as a clinical director, and I have a lot of experience working inpatient with kids who have mental health issues and drug and alcohol issues.
Hi, I am Denisa Bianco. I also work with PCS. I am a school-based outpatient therapist, so I'm working with middle school age students in a mental health capacity.
Hi, I'm V. Kwan. I am the clinical consultant of the Family-Based Mental Health Program at PCS's Children's Services Office in Lancaster. Prior to being a consultant, I was a family-based therapist for 17 years.
Hi, I'm Melanie Morgan. I am a licensed professional counselor and a certified family-based therapist. I am the assistant clinical director of children's services here at PCS, as well as the clinical consultant in Berks County. I work with children in outpatient setting and through a supervision in a systemic lens.
Perfect. Thank you all. And thank you all for joining me here today. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different topics, all the different things that are getting in the way of our kids and adolescents really living well, some of which we might have some agency over. Other things are kind of beyond our control, but we need to find a way to live with it versus be brushing up against it. So one of our very first topics that we're going to discuss specifically is the impact of kids and adolescents consuming online content, very specifically pornographic content. And I sent y'all a clip to prepare for today, but we're going to go ahead and watch it back here together for just a minute. We're going to share it with our viewers at home because I think it's hilarious. And then we can talk about it and unpack it here. So let me get my clip going.
Hiya, I'm Sue. This is Derek. We're here because your son just looked us up online, to watch us.
Matt! Matt, darling, there's some people here to see you. So he watches you online?
Yeah, on his laptop.
iPad, PlayStation,
His phone, your phone.
smart TV, projector.
Yeah, anyway, we usually perform for adults, but your son's just a kid. He might not know how relationships actually work. We don't even talk about consent, do we? No, we just get straight to it.
Yeah, and I'd never act like that in real life.
Nah. Hey, Maddie. You right?
Okay, Sandro, stay calm. You know what to do here. All right, Maddie. It sounds like it's time to have a talk about the difference between what you see online and real-life relationships. No judgment.
Many young Kiwis are using porn to learn about sex. Keep it real online. Get help and advice at keepitrealonline.govt.nz.
All right. So what do y'all think? I think that New Zealand's got us beat when it comes to public service announcements. Faux show. I mean, that is classic. And I would love to recreate the American version of this particular, but I think they do a great job by addressing parental co-regulation, to talking about one of the biggest concerns being a lack of consent, to displaying just the absurdity of the entire situation and addressing across the board all the different ways that I don't know that I knew you could watch porn on a PlayStation. Like, I had no idea. And we have a PlayStation. So fortunately, I think my kids are still a little bit too young to be using it for those purposes. But I had no idea. So some of the data that I have here today, so one of the very first data points I have is that nearly 3 in 4 teen respondents, 73%, endorsed being exposed to pornography or accidentally or on purpose. And I do think it's important to note this particular data that I will be talking about here today was published in September of 2022. So it's pretty recent. The studies suggest that based upon gender, there is a slight gender difference in that 75% of boys acknowledge watching online pornography and 70% of girls acknowledge watching online pornography. And I would go as far as to suggest that that's probably a little underreported. I think I said that 75% watch and 25% lie about watching. And then the data is suggesting that down to about 10 years old or younger is the first age of exposure to online pornography, with average age being 12 for when they first consume it. And so I'm sitting here thinking, like, I got some time. I don't need to talk to my kids about this sort of thing. But after a training we did last week on adolescent problematic sexual behavior, so not just pornography consumption, but when it goes a step further into acting out behaviors, that's what we trained on. And I went home and I started researching, like, how do I talk about about this with my 5 and 7-year-old in a way that's age appropriate and congruent to like our family system and what fits for us and the other aspects of our family. And I found myself feeling really stuck. One, I always turn to books. So like when in doubt, like when my kid came home using a racial slur, the first thing I did was buy a book about slavery and say, like, this is the background. Like, let's start learning about why, not just you can't say that word, but why you can't say that word. And let's understand it from that cognitive perspective. There's not a lot of books available for this for 5 to 7-year-old boys. So first I'm going to write one. You're going to illustrate it, by the way. So just so you know. And then what do we do? Like, how do we address this in a way that's developmentally appropriate, recognizing that this is how kids are learning about sexual relationships? And I have some more data, but I want to open it up and hear from y'all's perspective. Reactions to the clip or this topic in general. Where are we going with it?
I think something that really stood out for me with the video is this is happening in your home. It's not just, oh, this is happening at school. They're seeing it from their friends. It's happening during sleepovers at somebody else's home. This is the reality that this is actually happening in your home. And so opening up that door and saying, I have something I need to do about this.
It hit me about similar to what you're saying, Melanie, what hit me about the video was the distorted conception that the kid's going to have after watching these videos about male and female relationships, sexuality. And I loved when the guy said, I don't act like that in real life. And it's like, yeah, that's right, but kids believe this is real, how we should act.
Yes. Yeah, I sit down and work with kids and even their parents, and they talk about how what they watched on the internet, like they believe that is a real life sexual experience. And it's just, and that's what they think their first sexual experience is going to feel like. It's such a distorted perspective. Like it just reinforces that fantasy perspective. And it really takes away from, this is what I believe, it really takes away from that that deeper impact and that meaning of a person's first experience and ideally a healthy relationship. So that stuck out to me too.
Yeah.
The exposure is just everywhere. I feel like I can't watch a show on like any streaming service without some sort of sexual behavior being implied or happening. And so it's just like it's in your face everywhere. Like they just can't get away from it, especially with social media and everything else now. So it's just very, exacerbated right now and in your face.
It really is. So my kids really like that show, Is It Cake? I don't know if y'all have watched. It's, television
just finished
gold, truly, where people bake cakes that look like different things, and then you have to guess which is the cake and which is the shoe. And it had a sexualized content warning on it the other day. Like as I turned it on, I'm like, what? It's cake, y'all. Like how is this? How is sexual content like TVMA for a cake show? Is that? And we still love Is It Cake, and we still watched, but whatever. It's just sort of unrelenting, and there's this constant battle for your eyeballs, and it feels like sex is one of the ways in which is sort of that nuclear option when it comes to the battle for your attention.
Yeah. Well, and then it goes back to what is your first sexual experience supposed to be like? Oh, I didn't get that. So now I'm going to try something different. And then the pornography search terms start to develop, and then it's clicking and it's clicking and it's clicking. And it's not like when you used to be able to go get a Playboy magazine and that's it, that's all you had, right? Now it's even deeper. And now you're able to click, and before they know it, they're into content that is going to end up getting them into trouble, or they're going to develop problematic sexualized behaviors, and they're chasing this high that's not achievable. And they don't understand that a lot of it is acting. And then they bring that to their own life experiences, which increases the risk.
When I was 12, my mom found my Playboy magazines, and my mom and my aunt took a magic marker and colored over all the interesting parts, said nothing, and put them back under my bed. And I was astounded. But the lesson in that, I think, is that parents cannot do that now because they're powerless to, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think that's an exaggeration, not powerless, but it's more of a challenge to do that now because you don't have the magic markers that are going to take out all of those websites that are so dangerous. And what I think we were saying earlier about our first sexual experience, sometimes our first sexual experience is with, videos, pornography, websites, and I think what happens is we're robbed of the intimacy. We're forgetting, or we're being robbed of the opportunity to learn how to be intimate with other human beings because it's so easy to approximate that with a screen. So that's the way it sort of hit me as we were talking here.
Yeah. It becomes a dopamine chaser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that lack of intimacy, at least across the 3 Kids in Crisis pods, talking to people from so many different backgrounds and perspectives, from teachers to nurses to everything in between, this general theme of a lack of intimacy and a disconnection.
Right.
And as we become more and more, increasingly more connected, we're losing out on all of these other genuine points of connection. And so we're leaning into these artificial intimacy, porn is artificial
Right.
sexuality. But so it's not only what it gives us and the concerns there, but also what the opportunity costs, what it takes away from us, because we're living in this not necessarily real reality all of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I see in the readings I've done to prepare for this that there are some aspects of social networking site use that are helpful, especially if you're isolated from your family and they're a distance away, and you can connect with them pretty regularly. But I think that, Kim, what you were mentioning about intimacy, I think that's going to be the biggest challenge is being able to connect again with real people. When we got into Zoom for the past 3 years and we did our Zoom meetings because of the pandemic, it was really sometimes a bit unnerving for me to start doing groups again in person and to see real people. It was like, wow.
Yes.
Yeah, there's this piece of staying connected to your authentic self as well that I feel like is taken away. Because I don't know about you guys, my first sexual experience, it was scary, it was awkward, it was just all the opposite of what I thought it would be. And this porn is just idealizing it. And again, kids are stuck in a fantasy. And then when they experience maybe that awkwardness, that fear, this doesn't feel really that good, I think then they question, who they are when that's just their authentic. It's an authentic emotion they're feeling, because I didn't experience what social media depicts as what a sexual experience should be. I am different. I am abnormal, and that's scary.
Kind of going on with that, so I did a lunch and learn that Kim offered to me, just about violence that is happening in schools, and teen dating violence is a very more prevalent thing that's kind of happening. And one of the statistics that I had found was that 1 in 9 female high school students experienced sexual dating violence, and 1 in 36 male had acknowledged experiencing that. So by the time that they're in high school, linked to, like, if you've experienced some type of violence, if you've experienced 3 different types of violences, like over 20% have already been sexually active with like multiple people by the time that they're in high school. And this was done by the CDC with their youth risk behavior survey. I think it's like 13,000 some students that they
It's a
followed.
huge sample.
Yeah.
And right, chasing,
Yeah.
because like it didn't work with this person and the way that I saw this happen, then like I'm chasing to the next person. And I think that also, when it comes down to consent, right? And so if you look at the video titles, they're not like, person and person consented to a healthy sexual intimate experience. It's things like MILF lovers and, stuff like that, like then our kids are like, okay, it normalizes it because they don't have the development in their brains to say, this is not okay or this is not reality. They start to believe it because they also become immersed in it.
I have a stat for that, actually, that 33% of teens endorse 33% of the pornography they've watched actually has some component or some element of consent built into it all. Only 33%. Whereas 52% endorse having watched violent pornography. And like consider that in this other statistic, where 45% of teens state that they believe that pornography gives them helpful information about sex. Specifically, helpful information, not just information, but information that is useful to them in informing their practice. And 27% of adolescents believe that it's accurately depicting normal sexual relationships. Now, I'm not a porn connoisseur, unfortunately. I like to become obsessively well-versed in a lot of things. This is not one of the topics that I've done the deep dive on necessarily. But in searching for like common porn search terms and what the big things that from a different study that evolved is that depictions of violence are becoming increasingly more common. Even if it is not overt violence, there's a lot of fetishism of specific traditionally marginalized groups. So they lean into certain racial or ethnic groups. They attend to certain types of sexuality that is inherently subjugating to the sexual partner. And so 45% of kids that are watching this think that is helpful. How is this informing their beliefs and their behaviors as they go out into the world as sexual nobody likes to think about their kids as sexual beings, but guess what? They all are. Mm-hmm. And anyone who's raised little boys knows it. And so how do we use this information that we have to create a context in which kids moving forward? And my head used to be like, well, we just make sure our kids don't see it, but that's not one of the options anymore.
Right.
So
right.
Since that's off the table, then what do we do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think in my inpatient experience, the kids coming in, it was mostly males, but we had females too. We had to basically explain to them and teach them in very plain language about what was normal, healthy sexuality. Mm-hmm. Not only that, but how to even interact with a female. For example, if I sat here and instead of looking at your eyes, I looked at your breasts, you would be going, Carl, for God's sakes, internally, mm-hmm. Our
probably
kids,
externally too,
yeah,
Carl.
right,
I hate
right.
to tell you. I'd probably say something now.
I'd probably get hit with
here.
What the hell? What are you doing? Draw the imaginary line. But our kids, like Kim was saying, come out of that pornographic experience with a value system that is inherent in that experience of watching porn. Mm-hmm. And they know how to objectify females. They struggle, and I'm talking from a male perspective now, they struggled looking and relating to females as human. And we used to, when we go out in activities, we would say, okay, when you are interacting with females, this is how you do it, right? And we would give them the basics, and we'd explain why, and we'd give them the ethical and moral rationale for that. You don't stare, you don't drool. It's like looking at the sun. If you see someone attractive, you look away and you go, that person was attractive.
Looking at the sun.
Or your eyes will burn. So I think the struggle is reteaching our kids who've been exposed to this stuff, not only online, but just in our regular television shows. I mean, some of the stuff's ridiculous. How to relate, and I think it has to go back to just basic instruction along with a moral, ethical code that they need to learn about how to de-objectify and see people as people instead of sexual objects.
I think about a book. It's called Hold On to Your Kids by Gabor Mate, and it starts at home. It's not just home, but it starts at home. The book really dives deep into how our kids will seek information, and if we're not willing as parents, as caretakers, to step in and give them that information, they're gonna find it. And say they already have. It's still our responsibility as parents, as caretakers, to give them the right information, because they're going to find the wrong information, and if we're not there to correct it, that's what they have to go off of. And they don't have fully developed prefrontal cortex to say, well, this doesn't seem right. They're like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, let's do that.
Not only do they not have fully developed prefrontal cortexes, they are met with something that is very explicitly designed to tap into the pleasure centers of their brain and then just keep hitting that button. Like, it's not like, oh, it's they happened upon broccoli and all of a sudden that tastes fantastic. Like, this is something that very specifically is designed to latch onto your brain and cause you to chase it and look for more and more and more from that dopamine perspective. And we see it not just in the pornography our kids consume, but like I was watching, like, my kids love Mr. Beast, and I'm kind of, my verdict is out on him yet. I think he's fine. I think when my kids watch an hour of Mr. Beast, they behave differently than if they watch an hour of something else. And so I sat down when they were in bed one night, and it was like, it's the way in which they change the camera angles so many times, and like the loud noises and the funny songs, and like it's like bing, 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 like just trying to constantly draw you back in and keep you engaged, because it's like a main line straight into the pleasure center of your brain. And so if we're not talking to our kids before they see the pictures, before they accidentally find themselves on that website that has content that like feels good, but they don't know why it feels good, and it's confusing and it doesn't make sense to them. If we're not having those conversations in preparation for that day, we've missed our opportunity. It's already like, I'm thinking about like a taser line, like into their brain. It's latched in. We have to help them remove it then.
I had my mind blown recently. I was reading an article on this stuff, and the writer said, we're not the customer. And I thought, what's he talking about? He said, our attention is actually the product, and the customer is the advertiser that is paying the whatever website it is or platform it is money to get our attention. And the longer our attention is captured, the more money that they get. And it goes back to what you guys were saying about, I think you were saying, Melanie, about going down that dark hole as they monitor through algorithms what kids are watching. More of that content comes deeper and deeper in. More of our product gets demonstrated for the company, and here we are. So I just thought that was interesting. And frankly, I don't know what to do about these algorithms. I know there's lawsuits right now with some of the big tech companies about that, but I think it comes down to what you guys are talking about relative to parental interference and instruction relative to what they're watching. But that takes a commitment.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't just put on a firewall or some kind of security tracker and be like, okay, yep, things are good. Our kids are hackers. Right? Like, they figure out how to
Angelina
get
Jolie in the
through-
90s. They're
Right.
like,
they figure out how to get through all of that, right? And then they don't come to us and say, oops, I accidentally did this thing. We stumble upon it, and then we say, oh, shit, now where do we go? And
also, we're not, like, our technology isn't the only technology they use. They have
Right.
friends, they have, like, my kid, at his first day of kindergarten, they're like, here's an iPad.
Yep.
And so I thought, like, for sure that the school iPad would be totally locked down. It's not.
Nope.
It's not. And you as a parent have no control. Like, it's all through their system, so you can't put anything on it. But my son, before he could read or write, learned how to talk to Siri, because our kids talk to robots now. And he told Siri to search illegal butts, because butts are funny. They're funny when you're 6. And illegal butts are not funny. And we learned that the hard way. But you as a parent have no control over, because the school's like, here's an iPad that's unfettered access to the World Wide Web. Enjoy.
yeah, how many times does that come up in family-based?
Oh,
right,
yeah,
while we
all
work
the
with
time.
families.
All the time. Yeah, I have a lot of teams come to me frustrated. They pour in a lot of time and energy into coaching parents to even just sit with the hardship and discomfort of having these conversations with their kids and making time a commitment. That's hard for them. But they, they're workable most of the time, so they collaborate with the team. They create these plans. They start implementing these plans in the home. And then you have other settings just completely interfere with that. And then the parents are like, we did that thing, but we're not going to continue doing that thing because it's just hopeless, because everyone's just going to disrupt it, and turn it into something else. And that's frustrating. Yeah.
I respect your efforts to engage the parents, and I'm sure you have some work that you do in schools too, to challenge the kids. Because the challenge that we give to the kids may not be accepted at this time. But it's been my experience, especially working in inpatient, because I've run into kids later after they've gotten out of the program, where they thank us for making those efforts. And I think what your parents are doing, you're with your parents, you're planting seeds. You're going, something's wrong. You got to stop doing this, and then here's why.
Yeah.
It was interesting to me. I was reading some of the, and just thinking back and reflecting on some of the whys of this. Boredom, lack of stimulation, or social isolation. Having done some work, I know Kim has too, with people who sexually offend. You listen to their stories, and a lot of times the engagement in this kind of thing, if you can track a theme, is trauma, lack of connection. And so I think educating the kids and parents on that too is cool. I just admire what you're doing with them.
Thank you. Thank you.
And from the data, it suggests that only 43% of teens have ever discussed pornography with a trusted adult. So of those who have seen it, 57% never had a conversation with an adult about what they're seeing, what that might mean for relationships, what's real in relationships. So that's another thing that I thought New Zealand did really well, is this idea that it's not real. You need to have real conversations with your kids so that they understand what a true sexual encounter might actually look like, and it's not going to be those people that are on the it's not them. It's not them. And so that sort of leads me to the other half of this conversation, or where I was hoping we would go with it, is this idea. We've talked a lot about the impact of observing pornography on the way in which we interact with others. But I also am really curious about, and what y'all's experience have been, how it impacts the viewer from an internal perspective. How does it impact their own self-esteem and self-confidence? How does it impact their own comfort in close or intimate relationships? And what does that mean for their own sense of self as they move forward? I don't know. I don't think it's positive. Just doesn't feel like it's helping.
Yeah, I actually had, my oldest is 16 now, but when he was 14, he came to me, and this stood out as like, I think it was an epic parent moment for me. He basically said, "Hey Mom, my boys are talking about racks, and do you see that rack on that girl," which is bosom, and he goes, "You've taught me to respect women and to see them as a person. I told them that I don't see a rack." And then so his friends, and these are his close friends, his buddies, basically was like, "Oh, are you a homosexual? Are you gay? You know, you must be gay." And he came to me and said, "Is that true?" So then we had this conversation of, "Buddy, no, that's not. You are respecting a human being. You are valuing them as a person and not just a part of their body." And he was like, "Okay," because I thought, because they said it, that maybe I am. And maybe he is. And I'm like, maybe you are. And that's okay. However, you know, the message that I want to send you is you're valuing a human being and who they are. You know, and he was relieved. And fast forward, he continues to, like, his buddies continue to, just like wreak havoc as far as, you know, the joking, teenage boys. But I'm so proud of him, because from that moment forward, he's like teaching them, like, that's a female, that is not a sexual object, you know, and that person has a name, not just a rack, you know. So I'm just like, yay. But again, it's like those conversations that parents have, but it's not, it wasn't easy for me. Like, I remember going, I'm going to fuck this up, you know? But talk about, like, self-esteem. Like, he came out, he's a child that was able to come to me and say, this didn't feel good. It's, like, contradicting who I thought I was. But not all children are comfortable in doing that either. We're asking parents to sit in discomfort, but we're also asking children to sit with discomfort and go to an adult, you know? But, yeah.
I personally fall into, like, the conflict of, am I oversharing? I don't want to give them ideas. They haven't come to me, but I don't want to give them ideas. They're 14, 11, and 7. I don't want to give them the idea that they could find things on the internet that are not good. But then when I step back from it, I'm like, they already know. If they're not gonna figure it out from me, they're gonna go to school, or they're gonna have a conversation with somebody, an older relative, anybody, a friend, and they're going to tell them. So it's better to come from me. When you said the statistic, Kim, I thought about how many of those conversations happened after they were caught. Compares to preemptively having the conversation before engaging in the behavior. And I think it's a good way to connect with our kids then. So I think it's a good way to say, hey, we are here. Hey, we can have these tough conversations. It's not comfortable for Mom. It's not comfortable for you, but it's important. So let's do this. And you're building that connection. And you can see when your kids are uncomfortable, and you build that attunement, and you build that connection. So when you see it in another time, you're like, I remember that face. I remember that face that, like, this was uncomfortable. So now next time I see that face and I'm not the one who's making the situation uncomfortable, I'm going to move closer and be curious. So I think relationally, it doesn't just stop with the conversation. You can learn so much from having these extremely uncomfortable conversations. Nobody's like, hey, I'm going to sign up to have a conversation with my 10-year-old about pornography. Nobody signs up for that, but that's part of your job, your role as a parent.
I had a friend in the past who her daughter was shown at daycare by another child in the daycare, and she was, I don't know, probably like 7. Wow. And then like she then had to have this conversation about it, and things were fine. And then fast forward, like later they move, and then there's like another kid at like the age of 11 who like shows her more stuff again. So it's like, now we gotta have this conversation again because it just keeps happening.
Yeah.
And where I sit, especially with kids that are 5 and 7, and I don't mean this, so I've made a career out of working with those who have been charged with sex crimes, people who have offended and predominantly have perpetrated against children for the most part. And in 2023, one of the best ways to groom a child, or one of the most common ways, I don't know if it's best, it appears to be effective, unfortunately, is you send them pornographic pictures by accident. And then you gauge on that. What do they do with it? Are they too embarrassed to tell mom and dad? Do they go to a trusted adult? Does anyone ever confront me about it? Because if I send one pornographic image and I'm like, oh my goodness, I meant to send this picture of my cat. I can sidestep that. I can get out of that pretty quickly until people start to see a pattern in my behavior. Right. But a one-off, it's really hard to get caught in a one-off. And so then if the kiddo doesn't do anything with that, doesn't tell anybody, I've worked with numerous folks on the other side of the line that have engaged in the offending behavior that has said, that's how I knew that child was safe to pursue. I realized there was no one in their life that was going to talk to them about this. And that made them vulnerable to me. And I knew that was a safe, now all these folks were charged in the end, right? So it wasn't that safe because that's how they got to my office. And that to me, from the side of them accessing it and seeking it out, I believe that that's a conversation we need to have so that they're safe when they come into contact with it. But even with our littles, like having conversations about, like, if you ever see anything on the internet or anybody ever shows you anything and you're like, what is that? Or you feel weird. Actually, my children's book about porn, I would like to be Holy Cats, What Is That? Because you think you're looking at this type of cat on the internet, and it turns out it's a very different breed of cat. And so having those conversations with our kids so that if something like that happens, if somebody like almost, I think of like sonar, like pings into them to see, are you a safe victim? Our kids are attuned and empowered to say like, no, I'm not, because your weird thing, I talked to mom and dad about it. And maybe it was a true accident. But then if you're accidentally sending porn to kids, probably time to evaluate your life choices in other zones.
There was a similar situation at one of the elementary schools just this past school year where a student was walking to school and some random guy from across the street approached her and was like, hey, can you read this message to me on my phone? I can't see it. I can't read it. And when he showed her, it was like a picture of a naked woman. So she immediately like ran from the guy into the school and then ended up telling the principal and everybody in the building. So then they were able to then handle it from there, but just randomly like approached her and was just like, oh, hey, can you read this for me? And then it was actually a
And
picture.
do we think that's the first time this guy's ever done
Probably
that?
not.
You know what I mean? Like if it's your MO to hang out by a school and show teenage girl or preteen
Elementary.
girls porn on a phone, it probably isn't the first time you've done that. And the research on that is pretty alarming. Like most people expose their penises like 300 times before they ever get caught, because people take it as a mistake. They see it as an accident, especially if they act like embarrassed, like they didn't mean for it to happen. I had a client that got away with it over 1,000 times because he'd do it at parks and then pretend it was a mistake and act really contrite and embarrassed. And we like social niceties, right? So we're like, oh my God, no worries, don't worry about it. Then he picked the same victim twice, and that's the only way he ever got caught, is he accidentally did it to the same woman once, and she was like, or twice, and she's like, wait a minute, what are the odds that would accidentally happen? throw out those shorts, bruh. Like, I don't know what to tell you, but yeah, I don't know. That's the other reason, is that there's probably enough kids that came before her that didn't know what to do with it, or were embarrassed, or didn't want to talk to anyone.
I think educating kids about the level of sophistication because of, grooming kids is real important. And I think that's what we're saying. We had a client's case a while back where I was astounded. I mean, the perpetrator befriended the young girl. She was about 12 or 13, excuse me. And there wasn't any pornography, but what he did was make a split between her and her parents. That's how he began his work of grooming. And then he started to have an emotional connection, and then he invented like this contest where they had to decorate a T-shirt or something, and she sent her T-shirt in, and she won the prize. But in order to, collect the prize, she had to send her address so that he could come and pick it up, or give her the prize rather. And we caught it in time. Mom went to the police, and it actually all came out in therapy, with the child. That's how we discovered it. But I think the engagement with parents, and I agree that not being afraid to, tell parents what's going on, even if it's unlikely, or we might perceive it's unlikely for this to happen. I really identify with what you were saying, Melanie, about well, it's not going to happen. I don't know if I need to say this. Is this oversharing?
Right.
But most of the time, it turns out it isn't.
Yeah. Right. In hindsight's 2020, and then you're like, damn, I really wish I would have said that to them, because I could have said it in a context that would have protected them.
Right.
Rather than now they're on the internet and they're talking to adult men and adult women, and most of my experience when kids get caught doing that, they say, I knew that it was an adult. Did you know that it was wrong? I mean, kind of, but not really. Did anybody ever talk to you about it before? No. Because that won't happen to my kid. My kids know. They don't. They know this much, and there's this much. They know good touch, bad touch. Well, we're beyond good touch, bad touch now, because we have this whole nother platform that our kids can go and seek this. And I don't even think our kids are bringing it onto themselves. And that's the conversation I think we're having now, is like, our kids aren't bringing this onto themselves. These people are coming out and they're seeking it. And they're drawing kids in. I watched a podcast not too long ago, and the guy, he's like an ethical hacker, and he went on to, while he was sitting there in the podcast, he went into a chat room. I don't remember what the app platform was, but he went into the chat room and he said, 14-year-old female. And in 10 seconds or less, there was a guy who was privately messaging him, but thinking he's privately messaging a 14-year-old female, asking for sex or pictures or whatever, and it just happens like that, right? And so if we aren't attuning to our kids and we aren't moving closer to our kids, there are people who will, and that'll feel good to our kids, because look, I'm being noticed. Wow, in 10 seconds, somebody finds me important, and all I had to say was this one thing. And again, because that development's not there. They're not like, wow, this is creepy. And it's becoming normalized. It's becoming normalized in our media. It's becoming normalized. You were talking about shows being streamed on streaming platforms, where like this is becoming the norm. And we as parents and as educators and as therapists, we have a job to do.
Well, we live in a culture in which, like, kids take pictures of their breakfast and their outfits every day, and so we document so much else with our technology. I'm guilty of it too. It's like, oh, my dog's so cute today. Just look at it. You know what I mean? Like, we take so many more photos than we ever did before. We're walking around with a camera in our pocket everywhere we go. And so, of course, kids are going to take pictures of their junk. That's the natural progression of things. And kids are asking for photo, like, again, and some of that's very normative. Like developmentally appropriate to be sex seeking when you're 14 to 18 years old. That's just kind of the way you're made from a biological perspective. And if Johnny asks Katie for a nude photo and Katie sends it, and then Johnny's like, oh man, like it shows it to his buddies, right? Now all of a sudden, Johnny can be charged with dissemination of child pornography. And like that shit's real. Like that will follow you. That will, you will have fines and costs and legal encounters, and it will be embarrassing, and it can impact your job moving forward. And just our technology has outgrown, for our adolescents for sure, has outgrown their prefrontal cortex, but there's just not a safe way in which we can guard against or prevent it. And once it's out there forever. You can't put that genie back into a bottle.
Right.
A new thing in the schools now too is, so if you have an iPhone, you can airdrop things. So as long as everybody has their airdrop setting to everybody can just send you whatever, there's pictures and videos and different things that are being just airdropped to whoever, and like sometimes it's ending up on like the teacher's phones, and then the teacher sees it and then they're like how did I get this? And then of course then they have to go to administration and they have to track and figure out like where it comes from. But that's like the new thing too, like just sending it to whoever kind of like almost in secret.
And it's not just sexually explicit content that's being disseminated that way. Like I've seen a lot of like fights, like kids that are getting into fights behind closed doors, but they record the whole thing.
Yep.
I remember an incident here in town a couple years ago where the parents were charged based on one of those viral videos. Like the video went viral. It was all over one of the local schools here in Lebanon. Once it got into the hands of the police, they see one of the kids' parents in the background, like cheering them on and like, kick their ass, Seabass, or whatever they were doing. And the families got charged in those instances. I've worked in other family systems where the kiddos engaged in like some sexual acting out behavior and the parents were charged for neglect. So there's a lot of risks and consequences. And like if you're cheering your kid on beating somebody else's ass, like you probably should have to talk to the police. Like there should be consequences for that behavior. But there's a lot of content that gets like memorialized, sent out, and there's a lot of unintended consequences for that, but we don't think it the whole way through. So we've talked about sort of the impact of pornography on our interpersonal relationships systemically, how it's impacting places where kids congregate. I think we've discussed how it puts them at greater risk for perpetration or victimization. You discussed some of those instances in which kiddos reach out and actually intentionally seek an adult sexual relationship because it fulfills an attention-seeking need. Or sometimes, like, I've talked to adolescents like, yeah, but like they buy me shit. And that works for me. I work in a family system where my parents work all the time and I never see them and we don't have two pennies to rub together. And so, yeah, I mean, I have to have sex with this old guy and that's a little gross. But, you know, now I can get a car, or I got a new iPhone, or I'm getting attention. Someone's taking me somewhere. I get to go on vacation. So it also puts them at greater risk in a lot of different ways. Pretty dangerous. So I do have a couple a couple of things that just to run through about discussing safe internet usage, because I think it's important for us to talk about the problems, but I also think that we should land on some usable tools. So if we have listeners at home, they're like, all right, yeah, I hear you, Mel. I agree. I should talk to my kids 5, 6, 7 years old about safe and unsafe internet use. But how do I do that? Because like do I go in and be like, well, this is Pornhub and this is where we don't go? No, don't do that, parents. Instead, we have 10 things to keep in mind if you're talking to your children between the ages of 5 and 10. And that is the recommended age to begin the discussion. So we don't begin the discussion when they're 12. We want to have the discussion when they're younger. First and foremost, we want to use age-appropriate language. We want to use language that is suitable to that age group. We want to make sure that when we're discussing sensitive topics like pornography, we're staying away from explicit language. We don't want to give them any ideas or scare them in any way. That's funny about this. So when I was 6, preparing to go on the school bus, I had a school bus. I lived in the country, in the middle of nowhere, and so I had 1 hour each way each day. So I spent 2 hours on the school bus every day, and my dad was pretty worried about that. So my dad, who is a licensed psychologist, very a 70s kind of psychologist, who worked with problematic sexual behavior for his whole career, decided at 6 years old to sit me down and talk to me about how men think. And at 6, I remember sitting there, like, looking at my dad and then looking at my brother, being like, well, but do you think that way? Like, do all men think this way? So maybe not quite a global discussion, but his heart was in the right place. But if you know Roy Smith, you know anything worth doing is worth overdoing. So it was true in this instance as well. And his heart was in the right place, but keep it age appropriate in terms of your language. You want to encourage an open dialogue. This isn't a one-time discussion. This is multiple little discussions over the course of a lifetime. And I think with my kiddos, oftentimes I'm like, we're going to sit down, we're going to have the one hard discussion, we're going to have it in totality, and then I never want to have it again. And my kids are 5 and 7, and within 30 seconds, they're not listening to me anymore. They're not listening. So you need to chunk it down into small, finite concepts that they can have and make it a part of the conversation instead of a one time, let's get it all out there and never discuss it again. And in terms of that open communication, one of the rules that I raised my children with from day one that I think creates a lot of safety for our kids moving forward is that people who ask you to keep secrets from mom and dad are not safe people. Are not safe people. If anyone ever says, this is our little secret. And that was hard because, like, I remember my mother-in-law sitting down and like, well, this will be our little secret. We're going to go get some Skittles and don't tell mom and dad. And I remember saying like, hey, like, I'm not mad at you, but we don't use that language in this house because we teach our kids if someone tells you to keep a secret from mom and dad, that those people aren't safe. And that's the standard from birth on up. Parental supervision. You want an active presence in your child's life, using the internet to ensure that they're appropriate, that they understand the importance of seeking your guidance when encountering weird or unfamiliar content, and an actual active presence, like pick up the phone and scroll through, look at the search histories, check out your browsers, learn how to use a PlayStation, which is something I have to do, but do all those different things because the Tattle software is not super effective. Like it can catch certain big picture things, but if they're following nothing but lingerie influencers on Instagram, the Tattle software is not going to pick that up. So it can do some things, it can't do all things. Firewalls and certain internet safety mechanisms can do some things, but not all things. And I think oftentimes parents put that on their devices and it creates this false sense of confidence. And so they think they don't have to do anything else. And that'll only take you so far. We want to teach our kids safe browsing habits. We want to talk to them about like going off the beaten path and how the algorithms that if you start here and just let it play through, where it could end up and what to click on and not click on. We also want to talk about privacy and personal information, especially in an online setting. Kids so frequently think that, oh, it's on the internet. It's super like anonymous and no one can ever find. Yeah, they absolutely can find you. And especially if you tell them your name, your full address, your school's name. And some of that can be really little communication. Like my school district sells sweatshirts. And so my kid does this online Minecraft meetup group that's like guided by an adult, but it's a bunch of 7-year-olds that play Minecraft together. And he had his hoodie on that had the school that he went to log in. And so we want to make sure that even in those instances that we're having big eyes for the different risks that come with that and how to protect their privacy and potential dangers. We want to teach them boundaries so they understand respecting the boundaries of others and explaining that sharing or viewing explicit content can be harmful. And that if they ever get an explicit image from a friend or a mortal enemy, it doesn't matter. You don't pass it on. You don't hold on to it. You delete it immediately. That's not yours. We help them recognize what inappropriate content is. So not just pornography, but understand that like they shouldn't be watching really violent school fights online. My kid was watching Grand Theft Auto videos on YouTube. Like somehow he went from this to that on YouTube Kids. And I was like, are you watching guys shoot each other on a bridge? What? He's like, it's this thing called GTA. I was like, thanks, YouTube kids. That's helpful. Their digital footprint is so important. I think so often they enter into certain relationships with technology with a false sense of confidence. Like, oh, well, if I put a nude on Snapchat, like it disappears in 10 seconds. And now I guess it does know. I don't know. I don't trust Snapchat. I've never downloaded it. The moment it launched, I was like, that's what sex offenders use. No questions asked. But you can screenshot it. You can take a picture of it with a different device. And so anything you create, anything you put out there into the universe doesn't just expire at a certain point in time, but it's there forever. Teach them about trusted adults like parents, teachers, caregivers, and who to go to if they encounter something weird, or in an instance where someone's like, oh, you want a contest, what's your home address?
Right.
What do you do in that particular instance? If she didn't have a trusted adult to go to, I can't imagine how horrific that story could have been.
Yeah, and it turned out that guy, that was his thing. That's
That was
what
his
he
thing.
did.
He's
Yeah.
done this before.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like a pretty highly evolved like he knew what he was doing. He's
Yeah.
had some missteps before he got there. He figured it out. And then last but not least, empowering kids to think critically. So there's not just like illicit content or violent content or I mean, all kinds of different morally or ethically questionable content online. But there's also a lot of incorrect content online, and teaching kids to be critical thinkers and consumers of that. For my boys, we really like the podcast The Big Fib. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of it, but The Big Fib is people coming on discussing a certain topic area as an expert, and then you have to figure out who's lying and who's telling the truth, like who's misrepresenting information, how are they lying, and the kids are like the experts to try to figure out who's the liar and who's telling the truth, but just sort of embed that concept that just because somebody's talking on the internet, that doesn't make them everything they say accurate or the truth. And then last but not least, it's just important to make sure we're adapting the conversation to the child's individual maturity level and their own style. So my 5 and 7-year-old they're very different kids. There's conversations that I can have with my 7-year-old at 7 that I don't know I'm going to be able to have with my 5-year-old at 7. He spent all of yesterday, you'd sent me a text, and at the time my child was pretending to be a cheetah and refusing to use words or language for like 6 hours. He was just a cheetah. And so like I can't talk to my cheetah about porn. That doesn't make sense. But I do need to talk to him about something in the few moments that he's not running away, and adapting it to like your kid, your style, and not using that one size fits all like broad brush with which we paint.
Yep.
When you were talking about like how your son had ended up on GTA, just the stuff that is like that you can just get lost in on YouTube. I remember at one point too, like naked yoga was permitted to be uploaded on YouTube, but it's because it was yoga. But they were naked, so it's like, how is that still not porn? Wow. But because it was yoga, it was okay. So like, how easily could a kid access that because it's yoga? Because there's lots of different kid yoga videos that they use in schools and stuff like that as a brain break or whatever, so they could easily just gain access to that. And I don't know if it finally got taken down, but it was a few years ago, like that
Naked yoga.
That was a thing, and it was literally on YouTube.
Wow. Well, and last week at our training, somebody shared about splicing in pornographic content into videos. So you think your kid is watching, like, I don't know, I'm very like not up in all that, but like, I don't know, Bluey on YouTube, right? And then all of a sudden, like there's, and from what I understand, they're smart about it. So it's just like little mini clippets, but it's starting that curiosity. Like, wait, what was that? Oh, wait, there it is again. And it's building that curiosity. And kids who watches Bluey, 5 to 10-year-olds watch Bluey. Yeah, so it's marketing it in a way that makes it feel safe when it's really not.
It's interesting that a lot of the technology we're talking about hasn't been around. I mean, it's just now 20 years, 25 years old, and we're catching up. And as I'm reading research, there's not a lot done and a lot of conclusions made because it's so new. We're getting there, like they're saying, well, okay, you do more than 3 hours a day, you're addicted, and you're going to have low self-esteem. You're probably using it to regulate yourself. And you probably don't have too many coping strategies to deal with life. But I think that if we get really good at doing countermeasures with our kids and teaching them what the technology is and also where it's going, because in the future we're going to have to contend, I guess, with computer generated porn, that's AI, that there's no people, it's just an image, and why can't I watch an image because there's no victims, and then you go to a crazy place with all of that. So I think our hope lies in engaging parents to engage kids, and us engaging our own kids and talking to them about it.
And our kids engaging other kids.
Right.
Yeah.
Like your son. Yeah. That was so cool, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm so proud of him. I would like to take full credit.
I think that's where the hope lies.
Yeah. Know that there's kids out there that are having these conversations within their family systems. There are kids out there that are I mean, I was working with one kiddo not that long ago. And he came back, and it was such a rocky road. Like, he had been charged with some problematic sexual behavior. We have a pretty clear treatment protocol for anybody who has sexual offense charges, with one of our recommendations being like, get off the internet, get off social media, stop looking at porn, stop this, stop that. And I remember having numerous conversations with this kiddo's mom that she was like, well, but if he's looking at porn, he's not sexually offending. And so this is actually like this catharsis, this outlet in which he can express himself sexually without it being a risk or without him being a danger to anyone else. And it just was this like go around of like, but it's not helping him. Like, you need to understand that this is not improving his views on sexuality. And ultimately it sort of, eventually I was able to drop the rope with the family system and drop the rope with him. And then he came back maybe 6 months later and said, I didn't want to give it up at the time because I was, using it to self-soothe, using it to regulate. And that's not uncommon. Little kids, babies, 1 to 2, like 18 to 24 months will masturbate, not using porn, but will like play with their sex organs as an effort of cope. Right. And they discuss. I used to have a dog that would hump things when it was stressful. Like, it's kind of built into us, right?
I had that dog too.
You had a stress humper? Yeah, I had a stress humper. Yeah. And it was hilarious, but it's less funny when your kids are doing it, right? It's funny when it's the dog. But like the stress humping, it's a normal, it must have some evolutionary value.
Right.
But he came back. Sorry, I got distracted by the dog that humps. He came back and said, I was using this to regulate and to cope. And where the problem was for me is that I had literally no other skill. And so when I was stressed out at school, I'd have to go to the bathroom to jerk off because that was the only way I knew how to regulate. And I'm showing up and I'm saying, hey, let's try these deep breathing techniques or grounding techniques or mindfulness strategies or social support seeking or any of these other things. And just like our clients that struggle with substance use, porn and jerking off isn't going to compare to deep breathing. It's just not. Like, this is going to feel better. It's going to calm you down more. And it has some long-term consequences. Like, overall, if this is your only strategy, it will eventually cause harm.
That approach that you're describing, Kim, I think is so important. If you imagine this table and the only coping strategy, I have on this table is watching porn and jerking off and taking my laptop with me wherever I go on dates, to the movies, to get ice cream. I'm sorry. But if that's my only strategy, I'm in trouble. But I think we could trick people into getting better by continuously teaching them new ways of coping until activities, connection with people, until there's not a lot of room in that 24-hour day to do that And some days I'm so engaged with people, I'm so engaged with my school activities, I'm so engaged now that it's starting to lose its, what's the word, viability or power, and it falls off the table. And that unfortunately takes some time. And I think what happens too is age plays a factor as a kid gets older. And if that life does bloom and the issues being dealt with, like, continuous parental engagement, I think that's a great start, And I think that, like you were saying, Melanie, it brings hope to the process. I'm a big believer in planting seeds. And we may not see results right away. One of the toughest kids I ever worked with, he only lasted about 4 months in our program. I didn't know what happened to him, and about, I guess it was about 7 or 8 years later, longer than that, 10 years later, I was at a meeting, and I see this kid. It was a 12-step meeting, and I see this kid at the other end of the parking lot, and he's staring at me. And I'm thinking, why is this kid staring at me? Is he going to jump me and, beat me up or whatever, or try to beat me up? And then he ran and sprinted towards me. And I thought, oh, it's on, here it comes. And he puts his arms out and he hugs me and he said, Mr. Carl, I'm still trying. And I didn't see him. He attended the meeting. And so it might seem hopeless in terms of all this immense problem that we're dealing with this. But I think when we start to plant seeds, the results of our interventions may not be immediate, and they may have to suffer, but the suffering might be less, and our intervention might lead to a quicker resolution, I think, to this. And I think half the battle is us showing up and getting our parents to show up and getting the kids to talk about it, Sorry, I went on like a mini rant.
No. No, I think that there's the secret sauce, right? Is showing up despite it being uncomfortable, showing up despite it being scary, showing up despite you not knowing what to do or not feeling maybe the one place I question myself more than literally any other zone in my life is with my kids. So often, like every day, I'm like, is this like, am I the asshole? Like, is this okay? Like, what am I doing here? And there's no right answer. There's no like due north, but I think it's showing up, engaging them, looking to them and trying to muddle through it the best you can. But I know how dysregulating it is. Like, I know how uncomfortable it is as a parent to be like, gosh, I love you and I want to help you, but in this moment, I have no fucking clue what I'm supposed to do right now. Not a fucking clue. Other than I love you. Like, that's it. And so in those moments, I try to ground myself in that love. Is that like, mama loves you. I don't know anything else right now, but I know I love you and I want you to know that. And from there, we'll see where this goes.
Yeah. And that is like, I'm just going to sit here. And I'm just going to be in this space with you. Something may come out of this, something may not. But I love you, and just like the power. I mean, it's another book, right? Like the power of showing up, and our kids carry that, and so they probably don't know what to say, and they don't know the discomfort. I mean, they know the discomfort in that moment, but leading up to that moment, they didn't realize that you were going to come in and have a conversation about pornography, and being able to share that, like, okay, we're both sitting here uncomfortable, and here we are, and that I love you, and just, I'm doing this because I love you, and it just creates that connection. It brings out that oxytocin, it brings out that dopamine that our kids might seek somewhere else if we don't show up.
And that's the scary thing.
I don't believe you can tell your kids, I love you, too much.
Agreed.
So I think at this point we'll move into our last call. We didn't have any questions submitted for this particular pod, so we did add the Q&A piece, and we added last call. We do have some upcoming podcasts on a variety of different topics. So we have one coming up on toxic love and portrayals of unhealthy romantic portrayals and how that impacts our own quest for romance. So I thought it was fun to go from like porn to reality TV. Will be tomorrow when we film it, but that's one of our topics. We do have another podcast coming down the line about the psychology of gaming and video games, and role-playing games, and just sort of how that plays out and what areas and ways in which it's really helpful and healthy for us, and then what ways does it get in the way. And then last but not least, another upcoming podcast that we have yet to cast, and we also have yet to receive any questions for, is going to be probably another 3-part series on the stress and burnout of the helping profession. So I actually only cast one person for that so far, and it's a friend of mine who it was a inner city nurse throughout COVID. So an inner city ER nurse. So she's going to come in and talk about stress and burnout. And I suspect moral injury and a few other things within the helping profession. So she'll talk about it from a nurse's perspective, but we're going to look at it from other angles as well. So any upcoming questions that you have in that particular zone, please don't hesitate to send it my way. The address for that is kim@howtobehappyhour.com. And so we're always listening for new questions or topics for anybody who's interested. But the last call for today is focused entirely on how we can give back childhood to our children. We've created a context in which everybody is not required, but we're encouraging our kids to be older and faster and smarter and more attuned long before maybe is even age or developmentally appropriate. Our kids are being exposed to so much, so far beyond their years. And so one of those particular topics that showed up for me was like Alice drills. And I was curious, you said your school district doesn't do the active shooter drill.
No, like I've never
did it.
But like,
man,
but we've been like, not that anybody's come into the building, but there's been stuff happen in the community that has then created a lockdown scenario.
Based on your, like, the location of your school
Correct.
alone has led to a lockdown.
Correct.
And so just kids younger and younger being exposed. I mean, I remember he's 7 now, but when he came home in kindergarten and he said, yeah, we had an intruder alert at school today. And they're on the playground and they just yell, intruder, intruder. And the kids all have to like scatter and pick up books or rocks to like fight the intruder. And it's like, my kid is 6. Do not, like, he doesn't need to know that yet. And the research on it's pretty squirrely there as well. So I think the general topic of how can we, as a individual, as a system, as parents or people who work with children, how can we give our kids back their childhood? How can we give, a couple weeks ago, we talked about kids in sports and how every parent shows up like ready to get their kid that scholarship at that Little League game today. How can we give our childhoods back to our children so that they can hit all of those different developmental pieces before they're out there in the world in this state of almost arrested development or knowing more than is useful or helpful to them?
Play with them. One of the things that, as a parent, I think I failed at, and even when I was developing programs for inpatient, I didn't leave adequate time for play. Just play, just like screwing around, right? And because what you said, Kim, is so true. I mean, we put limits on our kids, we put expectations on our kids. They go to school, there's expectations. And I remember my clinical director saying to me, she threw the proposal I did for the schedule down when we were developing the program. There's no time for play. You never. And I worked with her for a while, and she pointed that out very clearly. So I think allowing kids to play, and that begins to allow that childhood that's buried underneath all that childishness, that's buried underneath all our expectations as a society, as a culture, to come out again, and let them be joyful, let them have their own personality, let them not present that front that they present. The kids who came into our program were fronting, and they had this personality that they had to have on the streets. And about 30 days in, they started to be little kids again. And some of them regressed back to like 8 or 9, because that's where they left off. So that's my thought. I mean, is just play in therapy. That's another big deal. Well, I have to have this problem dealt with by such and such a date or time, or I'm going to do 12 sessions. Spend an eternity with the kid playing, and then all that stuff's going to come out as a result of that. So just some thoughts.
Going along with that, so like I also do triple P, so positive parenting program, and like one of the components within that is quality time and like play time with the child to kind of help with their behavioral development.
Yeah, and emphasizing the importance of that. I've worked with parents where they live busy lives. Society is busy. It's an anxious society. They want to do. Chores, make sure that their kids know how to be independent, clean up after themselves. When we ask them, what are your bonding rituals? What can we do? How can we incorporate that into a session? Immediately it's, let's do chores, let's clean up together, we can turn on some music. In my head I'm going, okay, lame, I don't think your kids are going to see it that way. But it goes back to, reframing and really emphasizing, if this is not incorporated in your day-to-day, week-to-week, they will find pleasure and seek joy elsewhere, aka the internet. This is connection and correction, coincide. They exist simultaneously. But I think parents, because they want to be great and because they want to see their children grow up to be independent adults, I think emphasize more the correction piece and meeting expectations and responsibilities, and forget the importance of connection and play.
Yeah.
And I think as we move even outside of the home and into the community, and being a community, everybody, when I grew up, your neighbor was just as much your parent, caretaker, would look out for you just as much as your own parent would. Community programs, we may not have, I see community programs die all the time because there's no interest. Well, how did you gain interest? Well, we created this program, and somebody mentioned it one time when in a classroom, right? And so promoting that, as parents, being curious. There's all kinds of programs, like, good ways to use the internet, right? Like, there's all kinds of calendars and stuff to find out what these community programs are, and just support the community programs, whatever that might be, showing up and helping the activity. It might be financially supporting, but when we think about the greater ecosystem around kids, they don't exist in a vacuum. They don't exist in a vacuum in their family. They don't exist in a vacuum independentally. They exist in a community. So everybody, I think, has a role and a responsibility in building for our kids to have real childhoods.
When I had done family-based and so I was working in inner city type neighborhoods, just taking a 7-year-old to a nature walking path, and him seeing frogs and turtles was the most exciting thing of his day, because he had never experienced that, because he experienced gunshots and whatever else on the streets where he lived. So just like you're just saying, having those community activities, or just kind of shifting from where their environment is to kind of give them a new experience. And I'll never forget his reaction to seeing a turtle sitting on a rock.
It's a turtle.
Right. But he was so excited.
No, I want to end with a resource today, because I think I love the direction you took. A grad school friend of mine from 10, 12 years ago recently wrote and published a book with one of my college professors. So her name is Melissa Landano Conley, and Amy Morrell are the two authors. And it's a book called Just Be. That's all it's about. It's about just being with your kids. And it walks through, it's a book meant to be read by the caregivers, but with the child. And so it's got the parts you read with the kid, and then it has just some ideas for activities that, if you wanted to be with your kids, you could do these things as well. It's really beautifully written, beautifully illustrated. And so you can get it on Amazon now. I can't recommend it more highly to any parent that's like, I feel stuck. I believe what you're selling, but I don't know how to just be with my kids, because when I'm with my kids, we've got chores to do. We've got to clean up. Somebody's got to take care of the dog that they wanted. And like all of a sudden we pivot, right? Like we don't stay in the just being. And so often as parents, we really struggle, or at least I will say I really struggle with when I sit down with my kids and I'm like, all right, let's play. And then they want to play a game with these really specific rules that I don't like or agree with, or like, it's like, well, I want to play with you, but I don't want to play that way. So I'm going to go do some dishes now or like whatever it is. And like letting some of that go so that we can stay and be present, stay in contact with the present moment, and just be with the people that we love the most. And I think that's good for us. I mean, we're talking about what's good for our kids, but I think that serves tenfold for the caretaker as well. So I want to thank y'all for coming together with me today, wrapping up this particular content cycle. So I know everyone is very, very busy. So I'm thankful for your willingness to come join us. And thank you to the listeners at home. Again, if there's anything that can be useful or helpful to you that comes out of this space, especially for my PA counseling family and staff, shoot me an email and we'll try to get it on the pod. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.